There is a round tower in the Swiss city of Basel, 18 stories tall, no sign on the door, no flag on the roof. Every 2 months, the heads of 63 central banks, the people who control the money supply of almost every nation on earth, fly into this building for a private meeting. No cameras are allowed inside. No minutes are published. No journalists attend. And here is the part that should bother you. This building and everyone in it enjoys full legal immunity from any government on the planet. Swiss police cannot enter. Swiss courts have no authority. It operates outside the law of every country, including the one it sits in. The organization inside that tower is called the Bank for International Settlements. Most people have never heard of it. But the decisions made behind those closed doors affect the interest rate on your mortgage, the price of food in your grocery store, and whether your country enters a recession or avoids one. The Bank for International Settlements is not the only institution with this kind of invisible power. There are 2 others. Together, these 3 organizations form a system, a 3-layered architecture of global financial control that was designed almost a century ago and still operates today. This is not conspiracy theory. This is documented with some fact. And once you see how the pieces fit together, you will never look at the global economy the same way again. To understand how we got here, you need to go back to the aftermath of the First World War. Germany lost. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 demanded that Germany pay crushing war reparations, 132 billion gold marks. That is roughly $400 billion in today's money. The problem was simple. Germany could not pay. Its economy was shattered, its currency was collapsing, and the payments were creating a chain reaction across Europe. France needed the German money to repay its war debts to Britain. Britain needed that money to repay its debts to the United States. If Germany stopped paying, the entire system would fall apart. So, in 1930, a group of central bankers came up with a solution. They created the Bank for International Settlements, headquartered in Basel, Switzerland, on neutral ground. Its original purpose was straightforward: to manage the flow of German reparation payments. But the men who designed it had a much bigger vision. They wanted a place where central bankers could meet privately, coordinate policies, and, critically, operate beyond the reach of elected governments. The founding charter granted the Bank for International Settlements immunity from taxation, seizure, and legal prosecution in any country. The man who shaped this institution more than anyone was Montagu Norman, the governor of the Bank of England. Norman was an eccentric figure. He traveled under a false name, wore a wide-brimmed hat and a black cape, and distrusted democracy with a passion. He believed that monetary policy was too important to be left to politicians. He wanted central bankers, unelected, unaccountable technocrats, to run the global financial system from behind the scenes. His closest ally was Hjalmar Schacht, the head of Germany's central bank, who would later become Adolf Hitler's finance minister. Together, Norman and Schacht built the Bank for International Settlements into something far more powerful than a simple payment processing office. It became the private club of the world's most powerful bankers, a place where deals were made over dinner that no parliament would ever review. And for a while, that is exactly how the world's money was managed. But then came the Second World War, and this is where the story takes a dark turn. When Germany invaded most of Europe, the Bank for International Settlements did not shut down. It kept operating. Its board meetings continued with representatives from both sides of the conflict, sitting at the same table. The president of the Bank for International Settlements during much of the war was an American named Thomas McKittrick. Under his leadership, the bank facilitated gold transactions for Nazi Germany, gold that in many cases had been looted from the central banks of occupied nations. Some historians argue that a portion of this gold was taken from Holocaust victims. The Bank for International Settlements processed it all without asking questions. At the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, the Norwegian delegation proposed dissolving the Bank for International Settlements entirely. The motion actually passed, but it was never carried out. The bank survived, and the reason it survived reveals the second layer of this system. Bretton Woods created two new institutions, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The conference was dominated by two men, John Maynard Keynes of Britain and Harry Dexter White of the United States. Keynes proposed a balanced system where no single country would have outsized power. White had a different idea. He wanted a system that would put the American dollar at the center of global trade. White won. The dollar became the world's reserve currency backed by gold. Every other currency was pegged to the dollar, and the two new institutions were designed to maintain this arrangement. On paper, the fund was designed to stabilize currencies and prevent the kind of chaos that had led to two world wars. The World Bank was designed to finance reconstruction and development. In reality, both institutions gave the United States enormous power. The United States held the largest voting share in both organizations. The headquarters of both were placed in Washington, and an unwritten rule was established that persists to this day. The president of the World Bank is always an American, and the managing director of the International Monetary Fund is always a European. No vote, no open process, just a handshake between Washington and the major European capitals. The International Monetary Fund quickly became something very different from what its creators described. When a country ran into financial trouble, a currency crisis, a debt spiral, a banking collapse, the fund would step in with emergency loans. But the loans came with conditions. These conditions were called structural adjustment programs. To get the money, a struggling nation had to privatize state-owned industries, cut government spending, open its markets to foreign investment, and remove protections for local businesses. In country after country, from Argentina to Indonesia, from Ghana to Greece, the pattern repeated. A crisis would hit. The fund would arrive, and the conditions of the rescue would reshape the country's economy to benefit foreign capital. Take Indonesia in 1997. The Asian financial crisis destroyed the rupiah. The International Monetary Fund offered a $17 billion rescue package. In exchange, Indonesia was required to eliminate food subsidies, close 16 banks, and open its economy to unrestricted foreign ownership. Riots broke out. Over 1,000 people died. The president, who had ruled for 32 years, was forced to resign. The fund got what it wanted: a restructured economy wide open to Western investment. The World Bank operated on a parallel track. It offered long-term development loans, money to build dams, highways, power plants, but the contracts for these projects overwhelmingly went to companies from wealthy nations. A dam in Africa would be financed by the World Bank, designed by an American engineering firm and built with equipment from European manufacturers. The money flowed out of Washington and right back to Washington. Meanwhile, the borrowing country was left with the debt, and with a project that often failed to deliver the promised development. By the 1970s, a pattern had emerged. But before the debt trap took full shape, something happened in 1971 that changed everything. President Richard Nixon announced that the United States would no longer convert dollars to gold. The system designed at Bretton Woods, where the dollar was anchored to something real, was dead overnight. Now the dollar was backed by nothing but the promise of the American government. Yet it remained the world's reserve currency. Every country still needed dollars to trade oil, to buy goods on the global market, to repay debts to international institutions. This gave the United States a privilege no other nation possessed: the ability to print the currency the entire world depended on. And the three institutions at the center of this system, the Bank for International Settlements, The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank all operated in dollars. The trap was complete. Poor countries were now stuck in cycles of borrowing and repayment. They owed more to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank than they could ever repay. And the conditions attached to each new loan gave outside institutions more and more control over their domestic economic policy. Some economists called this neo-colonialism with a checkbook instead of a gun. Others called it the natural function of a well-designed system. While the fund and the bank operated in public view, attracting protests and criticism, the Bank for International Settlements continued to work in the shadows. Through the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, Basel became the place where the real rules of global finance were written. The Basel Accords, a series of agreements on banking regulation, were negotiated not by governments, but by central bankers meeting privately at the Tower. These accords determined how much capital banks had to hold, how much risk they could take, and effectively shaped the behavior of every major financial institution on Earth. No parliament voted on these rules. No public debate took place. The central bankers decided, and the world's banks followed. Consider how this three-layer system actually works in practice. At the top sits the Bank for International Settlements, the central bank of central banks. It coordinates monetary policy among the world's most powerful financial authorities behind closed doors. One level down, the International Monetary Fund acts as the enforcer. When a country's economy breaks down, the fund arrives with money and conditions that reshape the nation's policies. And at the third level, the World Bank provides the long-term financing that ties developing countries into a web of debt and dependency. Each layer reinforces the others. The Bank for International Settlements sets the framework. The fund enforces it in moments of crisis, and the World Bank locks it in over decades. The financial crisis of 2008 revealed just how powerful this system had become. When the world's largest banks were on the verge of collapse, it was the central bankers coordinating through the Bank for International Settlements who engineered the response. Trillions of dollars were created out of nothing through a process called quantitative easing. The Federal Reserve alone created over $4 trillion between 2008 and 2014. The Bank of England, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of Japan did the same. Interest rates were pushed to zero or even below zero in some countries. The banks were saved. The bankers who caused the crisis kept their jobs and their bonuses, but the cost was passed to ordinary people through inflation, stagnant wages, and a housing market that became unreachable for an entire generation. Asset prices soared. Stocks, real estate, art. The rich got richer. Everyone else fell further behind. And the central bankers who made these decisions answered to no one. They met in Basel, they coordinated their response, and the world followed. The International Monetary Fund, meanwhile, imposed brutal austerity on countries like Greece. Public pensions were slashed. Hospitals ran out of medicine. Youth unemployment hit 50%. The fund's own internal reviews later admitted that some of these measures were unnecessarily harsh. But by then, the damage was done. Greece had been restructured, its airports, ports, and public utilities sold to foreign investors at fire sale prices. Now look at where we stand today. The global financial system is more centralized than at any point in modern history. The Bank for International Settlements has expanded its membership and its influence. It now hosts regular meetings not just for central bankers, but for financial regulators and supervisors from around the world. Its committees draft the rules that govern everything from cryptocurrency regulation to climate-related financial risk. None of this is secret. The Bank for International Settlements publishes reports and papers, but almost nobody reads them. And that is precisely the point. The most powerful institutions in the world do not need to hide. They just need to be boring enough that nobody pays attention. The International Monetary Fund controls a war chest of nearly $1 trillion in lending capacity. When Sri Lanka collapsed in 2022, the fund was there. When Pakistan needed emergency funding, the fund was there. When Argentina restructured its debt for the 9th time, the fund was there. Every time the same conditions followed. Open your markets, cut your spending, restructure your economy according to our blueprint. The pattern that started in the 1980s has not changed. It has only expanded, and the World Bank continues to finance projects across the developing world, now increasingly focused on climate and energy transition. The same model applies. Rich countries set the terms. Poor countries take the loans. The engineering firms and consultants come from the same handful of nations they always have. The debt grows. The dependency deepens. There is one force that could challenge this architecture, and the people who run these institutions know it. The nations that make up the group known by its member initials, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have been building alternative systems. They created their own development bank, headquartered in Shanghai. China launched its own infrastructure lending program, the Belt and Road Initiative, that now rivals the World Bank in scale, with loans and investments in over 140 countries. Several countries are experimenting with trading in their own currencies instead of the dollar. Saudi Arabia has discussed selling oil in Chinese yuan. Russia and India have settled energy trades in rupees. Even France has completed natural gas transactions in Chinese currency. If these efforts succeed, the three-layered system that has governed global finance for nearly a century could face its first real challenge. The dollar's dominance, the foundation on which the whole structure rests, could begin to erode. But do not assume the outcome is certain. The Bank for International Settlements has survived a world war, the collapse of the gold standard, the end of the Cold War, and the 2008 financial crisis. The International Monetary Fund has weathered decades of protest and criticism and emerged more powerful each time. These institutions were designed to be resilient, to adapt to any threat and absorb any challenge. The question is not whether they are powerful. The question is whether anything can be built that is powerful enough to replace them, or whether every alternative will eventually be absorbed into the same system it was designed to challenge.